All good? All right. Good morning, everyone. Paul Schnell, Commissioner of the Department of Corrections. We appreciate you being here today. We're holding this press conference because despite our best efforts to correct the record and engage directly with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, they continue to publicly repeat information that is inaccurate and misleading. This is no longer simple misunderstanding. At best, DHS fundamentally misunderstands Minnesota's correctional system. At a minimum, this reflects systemic data management inadequacies or incompetence as it relates to DHS tracking of detainers in custody. At worst, it is pure propaganda. Numbers released without evidence to stoke fear rather than inform the public. I'm here today because we believe Americans and Minnesotans deserve the facts. The Department of Corrections operates state prisons. We do not operate county jails. We do not operate ICE detention facilities. We do not decide who receives an ICE detainer. When DHS conflates the processes and procedures of state prisons, county jails, and ICE detention into a single talking point, the result is misinformation. That is what we're correcting today. DHS has repeatedly claimed that there are more than 1,360 individuals with ICE detainers in Minnesota custody. Despite request, DHS has provided no data source, no tracking methodology, no jurisdictional breakdown, and no time frame explaining how their numbers were produced. We have asked to come together around the data. We have received no answer. At this point, DHS is asking the public to trust a number it refuses to explain. Since we can't wait for DHS to come out with an explanation anymore, we conducted a point-in-time survey of county jails across the state. That survey showed that there were 94 individuals with ICE detainers in Minnesota county jails. In Minnesota state prisons, there are 207 individuals with active ICE detainers, exactly as we have consistently stated. That total is 301 individuals, nowhere close to the 1,360 DHS has publicly discussed. That is a discrepancy, obviously, of about 1,000 people. We do not know where this additional 1,000 people are coming from or where they may be. Perhaps it's a typo. It may be an internal federal database problem. It may be that DHS does not actually know who it picked up from Minnesota DOC custody, because we are seeing them claim that they arrested people they picked up from our prisons through our cooperation in the last few months. What we do know is this: DHS's claims do not match Minnesota records, Minnesota court data, or basic jurisdictional realities. If any media outlet here is able to get DHS to explain their number, we would welcome it, because we have been unable to do so. I cannot speak for them, but I do know that numerous Minnesota county sheriffs are equally puzzled. Now, some Minnesota sheriffs are being thrown under the bus by DHS as being uncooperative, which is simply not true. We've reviewed every single DHS person that DHS has publicly named, and here's what we found. Many individuals were never in Minnesota DOC custody at all. Several have no Minnesota court or prison records whatsoever. Some had short stays in Minnesota county jails. Some are in custody in other states. Many were released directly to ICE, including cases going back to 2009, 2001, even into the 1990s. In some cases, DHS publicly implied Minnesota recently released individuals who were transferred to ICE years ago or decades ago. In some cases, after DOC released people to ICE officials, ICE released them back into the community and they are now subject to correctional supervision in accordance with their court-imposed sentence. So as you can see, this is not some policy disagreement. We have no idea what records they are working from because they seem to have serious records problems. And frankly, that should concern all of us. Now let me run through an example of what we're dealing with. Just this morning, federal officials said the releasees that were turned over to them by the DOC are not included in Operation Metro Surge or worst of the worst releases. Yet here is an example. On Monday, January 12th, the Department of Corrections coordinated with ICE to release 2 individuals who had detainers against them and were released into their custody. The names of these individuals are Meng Kong Yang and Joshua Fornow. When Mr. Yang and Mr. Fornow came into DOC, we let ICE know that they were here. Because we shared this information in accordance with state law, ICE was able to put detainers on both of them. As is the case for every single release where there is an ICE detainer in place, we contacted them weeks before the individuals reached the end of their prison term. We contacted ICE and let them know that, and we coordinated pickup arrangements with them. So on January 12th, an ICE officer arrived at our prison, and we allowed them into the Sally Port, where they took custody of both individuals. Dedicated DOC staff helped carry out, these individuals carry their property out for the agent. We'd like to play just a few seconds of video to show that transfer of custody taking place on January 12th. We also will show a screenshot here of the DHS press release. Now, as we are seeing numerous other cases, as we are seeing in numerous other instances, both of these individuals, Mr. Yang and Mr. Fornow, ended up on DHS's January 13th press release with them insinuating that they were released individuals, released into the community, specifically saying that they were, and I quote, criminal illegal aliens arrested yesterday during Operation Metro Surge. These people were transferred, their custody was transferred from the DOC directly to them. They were not picked up in the community as is implied. I will admit it feels a little absurd even showing a video like this to all of you, but truth matters, facts matter, and if we're going to move forward and accomplish our shared mission of public safety, we will need to acknowledge what is real and what is not. Today, ICE official Marcos Charles, during a press conference briefing, said the governor should direct county jails to honor ICE detainment. The statement that the governor controls the actions of county jails is patently false. In fact, the actions, as we've discussed, sheriffs who have been fully cooperative are now being accused of themselves being non-cooperative with ICE. State law requires us to notify ICE when a U.S. citizen and a non-U.S. citizen enters our custody, and we fully comply with that requirement. So again, despite what they're putting out, the DOC does comply with ICE detainers, and we're pleased that this morning they acknowledged that reality. As a matter of policy, even though the state does not require it, we honor every ICE detainer that is issued, and it is ICE alone who decides whether to issue a detainer. ICE decides whether to assume custody of a person upon their release from prison, and through the federal immigration processes, there is a determination made about whether they are deported or released back into the community. And the Department of Corrections is not involved in any of that. When ICE determines that they want to assume custody of an individual in DOC custody, DOC staff coordinate with local ICE officials to facilitate the safe transfer of custody. This occurs every time, without exception. Furthermore, neither the Department of Corrections or county jails are permitted to retain custody of a person beyond their release date or contrary to judicial order, including the satisfaction of bail conditions. So here's what we ask. If DHS believes we failed to honor a detainer, we ask that they identify the specific case so we can address it. We have not found a single instance of process failure in our review of the records and the names provided to us by ICE. Absent that, continuing to point out unsupported numbers is reckless and irresponsible. Unfair, I would add, to what the processes are in Minnesota and exactly what many Minnesota sheriffs across our state do. The false information does not reflect the day-to-day work and collaboration of committed staff of the Department of Corrections, county jail staff, and local ICE agents who routinely make regular arrangements for custody transfer when a person has completed the custodial portion of their sentence. We stand ready to work with DHS the moment they are willing to work with us. We need to align facts and the operational realities before we can solve whatever problem they think exists. This should not be controversial. Facts matter. So in the interest of transparency, Minnesota will continue to correct the record as long as DHS continues to distribute false information that has the effect of undermining public confidence. And with that, I would open it up for any questions people may have.
Commissioner Schnell, the point in time look that you mentioned, can you explain more about how that was done?
So we had a Department of Corrections staff reach out to every single jail in Minnesota. This was conducted on Monday, just this past Monday. And they reviewed the numbers, and they came up with that number of 94 people that are subject to ICE detainers that are in county custody.
It sounds like you watched the press conference this morning where they asked about these specific detainer numbers, and it sounded like they were saying that some of these aren't being filed at the county level maybe, which is where that discrepancy come from. Like, what's your reaction to that?
So, I think there may be instances where some, counties may not be notifying ICE up front. But the reality is, when they talk about the detainers not being filed, we know that the vast majority of sheriffs across the state do provide notification to ICE. One of the challenges that happens is that somebody is brought in, the Department of Corrections population is generally held for longer periods of time. So a person gets arrested, booked into the jail. If there's a notification that happens, ICE does whatever it does to determine that person's legal status before the detainer gets lodged. In the meantime, the person can be seen by the court, could be subject to a bail release to their personal recognizance, and there is nothing that the jail can do to hold custody of that person to wait for ICE to pick them up. Once they have hit either that judicial order or they've completed their sentence, they must be released.
And have you talked to the Trump administration? Have there been any specific requests on policy change?
I think one of the things that this has done is it has elevated, I think, some challenges. For instance, when law enforcement officers or jails do a query of a person's record, active warrants pop up on that person. But lodged ICE detainers do not show up in those queries. And so it makes this a really difficult and somewhat confusing and burdensome process. And so there are things we think that that could address this. But I think the concern becomes too that as we talk about things about the worst of the worst, we want to make sure that we are talking about people here, and our reason for cooperation is that we do believe it reflects the interest of public safety to notify ICE upon a release of a person from custody, which is why we do that as a matter of policy. But we do think there are some things that, from a data tracking standpoint, closer coordination, that could make a difference here.
And is there any reason to expect any sort of deal? And what I mean by that, it's a deal on jails and prisons in that sense.
Well, I mean, I think at the end of the day, we want to make sure that if, we can bring the heat down and some of the rhetoric down around what's happening in Minnesota and demonstrate the truth that there is cooperation around these cases, we think that makes good sense. And I think, there's an interest, I think, by many Minnesotans. Look, we take seriously immigration enforcement. That's why we do what we do. And at the same time, we want to be mindful of the fact that, there is a lot of concern right now. And if we're focusing on these people who are, quote unquote, the worst of the worst, truly violent offenders that are harming the safety of our communities, then let's focus on that. And we stand ready to work with them to address that. But know also that some of the people on the list were people that we had turned over to ICE, that ICE had processed, and they were released back into the community and are now under a level of correctional supervision by one of the counties or the state across the state.
So DHS seems to be implying that the Minnesota criminal justice system isn't working, and that the worst of the worst are just loose in communities, and law enforcement's unaware of their location until Operation Metro Surge. So I guess you spoke to this just a minute ago, but I wonder if you could elaborate on that, because that's the picture being painted by the federal government right now.
Yeah, and I think that's an utterly unfair and untrue characterization. The issues that exist around this detainer issue is not unique to Minnesota. I think it's playing out here, but the coordination around this, it comes up all over the country, and has to do in part with some of the challenges we face. And frankly, we don't, as a country, have a well-defined immigration policy that I think also makes this further challenging. And something that has long been discussed at the congressional level, and something that I think would really help. But at the same time, I think the information that is being put out certainly does not reflect the reality. That people who have been issued a court-ordered sentence in our state serve out their time in custody, and when they release from custody, they are turned over to ICE if they have a detainer, and if ICE elects to take custody of them, and then they do what they do and either deport or release them back into the community. If they're released back into the community, we provide supervision of them up to expiration of the court-imposed sentence.
When was the last time you heard from DHS?
We haven't. We have reached out. We have made requests through a variety of both direct requests and third-party requests to try and meet and square up these numbers, to talk about things that we think could improve processes. But as of yet, we have not had a response to those inquiries.
Why do you think they will reach out to you guys or try to sit down and figure out where these numbers are coming from?
So let me also be clear about that, because I think it's a really good question, an important question, and the question really is like, why might they not be reaching out? I think there's a difference in the reality at the operational level in Minnesota. Staff, whether it's from a jail or from the state, there is good collaboration. There's working relationships, and that have long been in place. But what we're seeing is the messaging that is coming out is not coming out of the local office of the immigration office. It's coming out of higher levels, and that's what begins to create a sense that what's the motive for putting out misinformation? And I can't answer that question. But I do not believe that the stuff that federal officials are talking about reflect the operational reality of what's happening at the local level, whether that's county sheriffs, the Department of Corrections, and the local ICE officials that we coordinate releases with or provide notifications to. Anything else?
Can you just briefly, once the video loops again, just walk us through what we're seeing here?
So, so the video that you're seeing, all it does is what we felt was important was that as as you look here, these are the two individuals that they identified as, being caught up in Operation Metro Surge, and yet this is what happens on a day-to-day basis. Just today, at one of our facilities, there is a planned release that will be just like this. The ICE official comes in to the Sally Port. This is all within the secure perimeter of the facility. The two people that are subject to the ICE detainers are escorted out by ICE officials and by our DOC staff. They're secured and they are taken to wherever ICE takes them. And yet, a day later, they show up as being caught up in the Operation Metro Surge release, and it's just not a characterization that ICE had to go out into the community and nab these people, that in fact there was a coordinated transfer of custody.
How does it make you feel that you have to kind of show this to prove like this is what happened?
Well, I think this is the troubling part, and I want to make sure that we want to have a good relationship with federal and state and local partners, and that's in the best interest of Minnesota to do that. And I think it's troubling that we feel like we have to correct the record and show the evidence, because on a repeated basis, just today, they may have acknowledged that the Department of Corrections does coordinate, but then said it's just the absolute policy of Minnesota sheriffs not to cooperate, and that is not true. And so we think it's important that we come together, develop a good understanding of what is actually happening, and make sure that Minnesota understands, that the people of Minnesota understand that we are doing what we need to do and what we believe is in the best interest of public safety here. Thank you very much. We appreciate you.